It's crazy to think about the fact that Resident Evil 4 originally came out 16 years ago, back on the original GameCube, and it was a game that immediately managed to defy expectations. It managed to combine together these different elements of horror and action, plot and lore and world building, but also with cheesy one-liners. It was something that really managed to defy expectations while also kind of breaking through to new heights, and I've always been a big fan of it. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and I'm a gigantic fan of Resident Evil in general, but specifically Resident Evil 4. In fact, I've decided to track down and beat every single version of it. Ones that have motion controls, ones that have great graphics, and ones that just feel a bit mundane. So, of course, I had to track down and play Resident Evil 4 VR. Now, let me just say this. This is pretty much my first time ever really going super deep on a VR title. I've never really reviewed a VR game, and this is something that felt extremely new to me. So I want to talk about why I feel like this is something that I appreciate that I beat, but is definitely not for everyone. So let's start things off with what exactly RE4 VR is. So there's been a bunch of rumors and stuff going around that eventually we're going to get a Resident Evil 4 remake. But in a way, this already, and I'm being dead serious, this feels like a remake to me because it manages to bring together things like new styles of aiming, new styles of gameplay, all new styles of puzzle, but also a little bit of censorship, which is a bit baffling. So first and foremost, this is of course a VR game. You have to play it with a headset. It currently only exists on the Oculus Quest 2, which means that in order to play this game, you do have to have a Facebook account. Whenever you log into this game, it actually registers you as a real person, which is a little bit creepy and weird, but once you get into the game itself, you're going to be introduced to what feels like a very different take on classic Resident Evil 4, mostly because, well, the controls are incredibly realistic in just a way that's almost bizarre at times. So this is, at its core concept, it's still just RE4. It's the same story of Leon trying to find the president's daughter in this crazy freaking possessed village. There's still these zombie-like ganados that are trying to kill you. There's still gigantic monster bosses. Like, everything about this is still Resident Evil 4, but the major difference is how you're going to defend yourself. I've always been a big believer in the fact that the original version of RE4 back on the GameCube was a gigantic success because, in large part, it was just so easy to play. Like, as soon as you picked up your GameCube controller, it was so easy to aim and shoot and reload and just use some healing items and stuff. Well, the controls in RE4 VR, they take quite a bit of practice. To properly talk about the gameplay, we have to divide it up into three separate chunks, which is the general movements, the crazy-ass aiming, and additionally, the newly created puzzle system. So first and foremost, there is a lot of different styles of control to this. You can actually walk around your room. If you're somebody that's really, really rich and doesn't live in a tiny house like me, you could just make it where the entire room becomes your reality. You can set your Quest headset up to actually detect the room, so as you're walking around, you can more easily just pick stuff up. There's also the ability of making it where you're standing and you can lean and aim and try and move around to dodge enemies. Or you can do what I decided to do, which is this teleportation method, where whenever you want, just by aiming your left controller, you choose where you want to go, and it almost feels like a point-and-click adventure where you can just duck past people very, very simplistically. Now, this feels a little bit overpowered at times. There were certainly sections where people were trying to throw dynamite at me or just do crazy stuff like getting in my face, and it was pretty easy to just blink behind them. And it's weird, but I feel like they kind of had to make it work like this. And as somebody that's actually very, very sensitive to motion sickness, this teleportation method actually was the easiest on my brain. Like, it's so fake and it's so unrealistic that it feels like it doesn't trick your brain. Instead of your body trying to, print this video game onto your freaking eyeballs. Instead, it feels like, all right, I'm watching an interactive movie. So it did not actually set off my motion sickness whatsoever, which I was extremely happy about it. But let's talk about that aiming, in fact. So in this game, obviously, it is VR, so you're going to expect things to work a little bit different. But here's the part of this that took me the most adapting, which was the fact that every gun very much works different. A handgun's just going to be on your belt, so just by reaching your hand down slightly close to your waist, you can pick up a gun and fire it. But reloading it is not going to be a button press. You reach down with your opposite hand, you have to pull up a manual clip, put it into the gun in order to reload. So this is a little bit of a learning curve. Like, honestly, I very, very much sucked with this for about the first 45 minutes. It took a while to get used to the habit of constantly reaching for ammunition and putting it back into the pistol itself. Now, as you reach towards your belt, you can actually set it up to have different weapons, in fact. Grenades, knives, your rifles and stuff like that. But here's something I found interesting is that the game, it actually has this new physics system built into it, which feels kind of awesome. It certainly adds to the immersion at times. Like, it was fun to do things like, at times I was trying to see if I could set off traps by physically throwing a knife at it. And in real life, I really was, as you see in this gameplay here, reaching down, pulling out my knife, and then actually throwing it, which feels weird. It didn't work to set these bombs off, but it felt good to actually have this ability to experiment and try new things. I also do kind of like the fact that whenever you throw guns, they just get magnetized, sucked back onto you. Now, you can make two different kinds of weapons. There's belt weapons, and there's shoulder weapons. So whenever you get bigger, heavier stuff, like a shotgun or a sniper rifle, in fact, these will not fit on your belt. I guess that's kind of realistic since they would probably drag on the ground itself. So instead, since they go on your back, whenever you want to pull them out, you physically reach over your shoulder, grab them, and it makes where you have it in your hands. Now, this system works pretty good, but here is the big detriment to it, which is that because every gun works so differently, you really do have to practice. Like, specifically, the biggest weapon I had so much trouble with is the classic hunting rifle. So whenever you're trying to aim and look down the scope, it's a little bit just shaky in general. I don't know if I have typically quivering hands or something, but a lot of times looking down the scope, not exactly a smooth experience. But what else was kind of causing me trouble is the fact that whenever I was aiming, it felt like every time I had to reload, I had to pop out each individual shell and put the next one in. It was a little bit of a pain to try and get that to work. And the shotgun does this as well. What's weird is that when you're using the shotgun, you have to push the freaking cocker thing forward, eject the shell, put another one in manually by hand, and then cock it back. And it feels a little bit weird when there's a bunch of like chainsaw dudes and people trying to hunt you down, trying to do this in a flurry. It is extremely stressful. But to me, as frustrating as this was at times, as much as this did, I will fully admit, get me killed again and again and again, this is probably the biggest benefit to the game itself, is that Resident Evil 4 VR feels like an all-new game. It feels like you are having to play the game differently than has ever existed before. Trying to adapt to this style of gameplay really goes past just, typical learning curves of memorizing the buttons. You actually have to be good at Resident Evil in order to do this. I do want to just quickly say that graphically, there is some stuff in this game that looks incredibly great, like shockingly decent for the fact that this game is 16 years old, and some of it looks pretty bad. Like some of the textures of walls, doors, some of the grounds you're walking on, that's the stuff that looks a little bit weird. I think the like core environmental textures don't look great, whereas your weapons, everything you shoot, these seem like totally new assets. They look fan-freaking-tastic. Like, when you're shooting, it's cool to actually pick stuff up and look at it. It's crazy the amount of times where you can just interact with different objects. This is probably the thing that personally was the most enjoyable to me to just mess around with, was the times where you can actually use your floating hands to interact with different random things. Like, when you're saving your game, you walk up to a typewriter, but instead of just pressing a button and instantaneously saving it, you can choose to make it so the typewriter has these button presses. You can name your save file by physically typing on it. So of course I had to name myself Subscribe to be dumb, but I think it's really cool that I can even do that. Now the final part of this that I want to talk about when it comes to the gameplay is the fact that it does have this weird new addition of puzzles. So you're still solving the same puzzles as a core concept, like a lot of times if you have to turn on spotlights or open up a door, they work the same way. But my problem is that sometimes these things felt like they just had too much of an interactive focus to it. Like times where you want to just open up this door, I'm already fully aware of the fact that in order to open up this door, you have to combine these two pieces of a key to do it. I've already beaten this game like 100 freaking times. I know how it works, but it becomes a little bit needlessly convoluted of just trying to figure out which function will let you progress. I think this game is very good overall, but it does have some weird cut content and some censorship that I feel like is incredibly important to talk about. So for whatever reason, there is dialogue that's cut from this game. Now you're not going to notice it just if you haven't played these games before. If this is your first ever Resident Evil just taste of RE4, you're not going to notice it. But some of the most famous lines, like here's an example, is that Luis, when he's calling the president's daughter and saying that she has great ballistics, well, for some reason they cut that line out. So instead, it makes their very friendly banter sound incredibly aggressive, because it makes it where instead of these two people having like a friendly like back and forth during this chaotic situation, it feels like two people like actually yelling at each other, which to me does kind of suck. I feel like some of the dialogue they've cut is probably because they're afraid of the game getting canceled or whatever. Some of the flirty just talk has been removed. I don't know, like everything in this game always felt normal. Like when, you know, Ashley is flirting with Leon or whatever and he's casually deflecting her advances. Like everything in this game felt like it was mature and built and goofy and funny for a particular purpose. So the fact that they decided to remove certain lines because they may be offensive in 2021 feels like a gigantic overstep that nobody in the world would actually ask for. Now, the other part of this that's been removed, which is definitely the most shocking, is the fact that a lot of the most famous modes is that after the original release of RE4, all the other versions of it actually have this added content. Like there's this chapter where you get a chance to play as Ada Wong called, you know, Separate Ways. There's this Mercenaries mode, which is obviously one of the most famous aspects of it, where you get a chance to fight just tons and tons of enemies, and every time you kill somebody, it puts time on the clock. All of this has been removed. All of this is gone. Like, this is such a core feature of Resident Evil 4, and it's gotten the axe. Now, the last thing about this that's definitely the most shocking, this is a $40 game. Every other version of this is way cheaper and has objectively more features. You're paying basically for the new controls. You're paying this because it's a cool way to shoot at people and test out these actual guns that look at cool assets. Do I regret buying this? No, I don't. But it's weird that this is such an expensive Resident Evil game that I feel like I'm probably going to spend the least time playing compared to every other version of Resident Evil 4. Well, we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving Resident Evil 4 VR an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a gigantic thumbs up. If you enjoyed it, please also subscribe and share the video if you'd like, because this was a very, well, different project for me. I want to dedicate this video actually to my friend named Kim. This is actually Kim's headset. Thank you, Kim. You're very nice to lend me your headset, because look, I'm not buying a VR headset for one freaking video, but thanks to you guys, you all rock. Do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Man, it was cool. Pew, 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 pew. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, you know, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.